boards are elected in most jurisdictions in Virginia. They were for a long time appointed. As a matter of fact, that appointment of school boards is a legacy of segregation. It was done in the 1901 Constitution in order to take away powers that blacks had. And so that only a handful of people would vote, so that a small group of people would control the elections. And as you know, for many years, that's exactly what happened. The blacks didn't even vote. A lot of white folks didn't vote. They had to pay poll tax and all of that. So that was finally the legislature said, we're going to do away with it on a local option. If you get enough signatures on a petition, then you can put it on the ballot. Now, they put it on the ballot in Hanover in 1994, and the Hanoverians said no. I suspect they were talked to by their leaders and told, don't change anything, everything's going fine. But I think when you see history tests like this, and I'll tell you one thing, the history books that I've seen the history book I seen coming home last year with my daughter, I called it the Bill Ayers Al-Qaeda history book. Because as far as I was concerned, it was as damaging to this country as Bill Ayers and Al-Qaeda. Because it's teaching minds about false things, about the free market system, about how things work, about how communism was defeated and all of that. But that's not why I'm here today. I'm here today to talk about, are we ready to talk about ICLEI? All right.
But Sandy, we had talked, and you wouldn't be clear for May.
Right. I was hoping that maybe in June we could have that debate. And I'm willing to debate, and I'm starting to study up on the issues a little bit. And we're going to have a debate that everybody's going to be proud of, and it's going to be invited. The whole community's going to, and we're going to try to push this issue and get it going so that it's out there. I would like to get the Mechanicsville Local and the Ashland paper and all that to cover it. But right now we're going to talk about ICLEI. But did that answer your question, Gary?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you again for having me. ICLEI is an organization, it's a league of municipalities. A county, a city, a town, if it's incorporated, can join it. There's actually a few like river districts and things like that that are members of ICLEI. I think out in California, there's some of those types of districts are out there, water districts. And ICLEI has a United States affiliate. Yes, sir.
I think that mic will come off.
Okay, well, let's do that then.
Come straight up there, Sandy. I'll get it.
You might not want me to pull straight. It might not work. Okay, there you go. I'm not going to try to sing, so don't worry. It originally meant the International Council for Environmental Initiatives, but it is now named ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. Now, what's wrong with sustainability? As I said, last night they had a great presentation on sustainability down at the Crown Plaza, and I recommend that you get it. I recommend that you hear Donna Holt talk about it. I'm not here primarily to talk about it, but I'm going to tell you that there is an ideology. Rush Limbaugh once said that the communists would find their way into the environmental network would be the next place where the communists would go, because the totalitarians can use the environment and fear and angst, and we must cross global borders, and we can't have sovereignty anymore, and all of that and the main way they do it is through environmental issues. And sustainability is not recycling. It's not resource recovery. It's not trying to save energy and conserve. There's nothing wrong with those things. Here's the opinion of Richard Rothschild, who was here in Richmond last night. If you drive Ford F-150, I don't, but if you do, if you eat beef, you live too long. Maurice Strong said, current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class, that's you, involving high meat intake, use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and workplace air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable. So it's just very, very clear to me that this is an ideology from without that's being brought within. And here's some more Rothschild, where he says, they tell us what kind of light bulbs to buy. They require flush taxes. They build subways without parking lots. They tell farmers how to farm, and they tell us what our kids will eat in school. It takes away property rights, and they're now determined to eliminate single-family homes and private vehicles. Can everybody hear me back there? I care about our environment, But I believe that the last great hope to save our environment rests in capitalism and not big government. And I think he's right. It was great to hear from Rothschild, and it was great to meet him and shake his hand. And he thanked me for writing the blogs about Carroll County. Carroll County is a suburban county in Maryland, has 150,000 people. It's in a blue state. When they got 5 commissioners elected in 2010 with the help of the Tea Party and the activists, they withdrew from ICLEI, and they were the first municipality to withdraw. In the Carroll County Times for January the 21st was where the announcement. They unanimously voted to terminate their membership with the International Council on Environment that provides technical consulting, training, and information services to support local government in the implementation of sustainable development at the local level. Now think about that for a minute. It sounds good, doesn't it? But the problem is we've already identified that sustainable development is not in favor of our values as Americans. So consulting, training, and information services to implement this thing isn't very good. But the problem, if ICLEI only did that, I wouldn't even come here tonight. I wouldn't even bother your time for this. There's 3 more counties that have left ICLEI for one reason or another. A county in California decided not to renew their membership. And the patriot out there told me that the reason they did it is because they didn't want to fight about it. They didn't want to fight with the left about it. So they just let their membership lapse. There was no vote. There was no decision. They just told the city manager quietly to take care of it. Montgomery County in Pennsylvania withdrew there. They did the same thing because there was all kinds of people who went to meetings and protested the fact that went to at least one meeting and protested the fact that Montgomery County was a member of ICLEI. They quietly got out. And here's the best win of all. In Edmond City of Oklahoma, they withdrew from ICLEI, although the city council is totally in denial. They still believe in all that stuff. But they had a meeting in December where they tried to say, all right, let's all go into separate rooms and talk about consensus, and let's bring about sustainability. But the people stood up. There were 200 people at this meeting, and the vast majority of them stood up and said, we don't want to go into your rooms and talk about consensus. We want to tell you we don't want this in our community. We don't want our community to be a member of this organization. And they basically stopped the meeting. They basically disrupted the meeting, not peacefully. They were nice about it, but they were firm about it. And they basically said, we're not doing this stuff in our community. We're against it altogether. You should get out. Then what happened is that then later in December, they tried again to bring about, what is, I'm wondering about. I think it could be, it's not my computer. Although my computer is working on a battery, so I'm trying to. But I'll finish about Edmond. Edmond, they tried to have another meeting. That didn't work. And then they waited until March. And then the early part of March, they had a meeting. People showed up again, and everybody said, 33 of the 34 speakers said, get out ICLEI altogether. So after that meeting, the city manager said, we're out. We're going to get out of ICLEI. I want to tell you that I'm seeing more and more where city managers and county managers and mayors are making these decisions. And we don't really have a county. We don't have a mayor. We have just a board of supervisors. Now, thankfully, Hanover County, the town of Ashland, they're not members of ICLEI. But a lot of these decisions are being made by big city mayors. They're being made by city government officials that are not necessarily elected. In fact, city managers are almost never elected. But they're very, very important officials, and we need to keep track of who gets hired to these positions in Hanover. So Edmond got out. ICLEI has global goals. This is from their website. It says the pace of global environmental change, the degradation of ecosystem services global, and the overshoot of the human footprint on Earth requires an acceleration of local efforts. That probably wouldn't be too controversial, although I would totally disagree with it. There's almost 1,200 local governments involved. And I can tell you that a good percentage of them are from the United States of America. They decide the policies of the organization much the same way that the UN decides. Each country has one vote at the General Assembly. And so I presume subject to some kind of population thing, they decide who their leaders are going to be and what they're doing. Now the ICLEI Charter, the Constitution, if you would, of ICLEI, talks about the formal relationships that it has with the former United Nations Environment Program and the International Union of Local Authorities, and that was changed into the World Organization of United Cities and Local Governments. Orwell couldn't have said it better. This Orwellian named, which I call ugly, because it is ugly. Now, I want to tell you, I went to Ugly's website. I've been to Ugly's website several times. I can't get a membership list. I can't determine who's a member of Ugly. There's a relationship between Ugly and the National League of Cities, but I haven't been able to figure out exactly what it is. Now, you can go to ICLEI's webpage, and they'll tell you all the members of ICLEI. They'll tell you all the members in California. They'll tell you all the members in New York, all the members in Virginia. You're going to see it in a minute, in a moment. But the National League of Cities has some kind of representation in the governing body of Ugly. Now, I'm not saying go out and cause trouble for the National League of Cities, because I don't know exactly what the issues are between these two organizations. But the National League of Cities has some kind of affiliation with Ugly. Ugly wants to be what? They want to be an observer member of the UN General Assembly. That means they want to have the privilege of talking at the UN on the behalf of their members. That includes their members that are American cities, and therefore they want to have a place at the foreign policy table. This is from the news section of the Ugly webpage, and it says, the present president of the United Cities and Local Governments said they demanded to have Ugly to have observer status at the General Assembly of the United Nations. That is a clear foreign policy issue. Clearly they are achieving foreign policy goals. So what does ICLEI have to do with Ugly? Well, ICLEI, they call it a partner, said the association shall seek an agreement to be the agent. I can't find that agreement. But they're partners, they're working together. So ICLEI and Ugly are tied together to accomplish the goals of their organization as to sustainable development and as to other things as to global goals. The association's mission shall be to build and serve a worldwide movement of local governments to achieve tangible improvements in global sustainability with special focus on cumulative local actions. This is ICLEI's goal from their chart, section 1-2. This is more from their webpage. They want to connect cities and local governments to the United Nations and other international bodies. ICLEI represents local governments at the UN at this and at climate change and biodiversity and the UN habitat programs and all that stuff. Here's the representation mandate. The association shall serve as an international representative for its members and campaign participants by providing advocacy before national and international governments, agencies and organizations, and multilateral bodies. ICLEI has other political goals. This is from their charter, section 1-7. Adopt patterns of production, consumption, and reproduction that safeguard Earth's regenerative capacity, human rights, and community well-being. I'm going to tell you what this means. This means abortion. Absolutely means abortion. They want abortion on demand. The UN has already been caught trying to force a nation to have abortion on demand. That was East Timor. Because East Timor signed a treaty called CEDAW, which is the Convention for the Elimination of the Discrimination Against Women. They ought to get out, frankly. They ought to say, we're not going to be in this treaty anymore. But they were told they ought to consider, because everybody who signs up for CEDAW, and the United States is not a member of CEDAW, thankfully. Thank God. Because the United States would have to do a report to CEDAW every year, to the committee that runs CEDAW every year. And then the committee gets to come back and say, well, we think you're deficient in this area and that area and this other area, blah, blah, blah. And so they told to East Timor, and they tried to get them to liberalize their abortion laws. Maybe not abortion on demand, but they wanted them to liberalize it. Basically, as far as I can tell, East Timor pretty much told them no. I'm glad they did. If you eradicate poverty as an ethical, social, and environmental imperative. Now, everybody's in favor of getting rid of poverty, but how are we going to get rid of poverty? I prefer to get rid of poverty by giving people an equal opportunity. They want to get rid of poverty with statist and socialistic solutions. What else? We have economic activities and institutions at all levels promote human development in an equitable and sustainable manner. Again, sounds real good, but it's share the wealth. It's not share the opportunity to get wealth. And then finally, we have affirmed gender equality and equity as prerequisites to sustainable development and ensure universal access to education, health care, economic opportunity. This is another example of the political heresy that health care is a right, that you have a right to have it, and therefore Obamacare is right, and that people have a right to economic outcomes. We don't have a right to the outcome. We have the right to try to succeed. That's totally inimical to the idea of the Declaration, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And there's more. And we got the discrimination. Everybody's against discrimination, but it's going to lead to political correctness. I guarantee it. It's already happening. Strengthen democratic institutions, integrate into formal education and lifelong learning. Knowledge, values, and skills needed for a sustainable way of life. That's propaganda and indoctrination. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, kids are being indoctrinated into this environmental nonsense all the time. I was watching the television one day, and they had these rock singers, these young teenage rock singers that they listened to, women, and they were talking about, I'm going to pledge allegiance to the earth. I just about had a stroke. I told my kids, I'm not pledging allegiance to the earth ever. In fact, I think I was so mad I did the Pledge of Allegiance. When you join ICLEI, you buy into all of it. This is the contract. I found this at a webpage. I think it's Tom DeWeese's, but I'm not sure. This is what the contract says between the municipality and ICLEI. I want you to know the city of Richmond's a member of ICLEI. Receipt of membership fees and an adopted program resolution, your jurisdiction will be considered a full ICLEI member. All ICLEI council members are governed by the ICLEI charter. Copy of the ICLEI charter will be sent to the primary contact indicated above. This, my friends, is a confederation or alliance. Now, why is this all important? Why is all this background important? I'll tell you why in just a moment. But first, I want to go back and do the... Now, if you look at Lane County, Oregon is where some patriots got together and they went to the meetings. It's not like it takes a lot of people, ladies and gentlemen. It didn't take a lot of people in Edmond, Oklahoma. It didn't take a lot of people in Lane County. But fortunately, we had this budget specialist, and this is from the minutes of the meeting. We had the budget specialist, and she is an honest, upright person, and I can tell it because this is what she said. She said, it's more involved than just giving a check to ICLEI. You have to have staff liaisons. You have to have elected officials as your liaison, media and staff liaisons. Then the second piece of joining is you pass a resolution within 6 months stating that the county's going to go forward and make climate mitigation was one of their goals and how they will do it. And they have to work on a set of milestones. So this lady said, we need direction from the board as to what's going to happen. I know this has got to do with it. She reported that the city of Eugene had joined ICLEI, and then they had done the community climate action plan, and that cost them $100,000 plus $20,000 they paid to a consultant. We'd like to be a consultant on sustainability. Let me tell you something. You can send your kids to school, and they can actually get a degree in sustainability. They can. And I can tell you right now, even though it's a bad racket, it's a pretty lucrative racket at the moment. Because most of these major cities have sustainability coordinators and sustainability directors, sustainability committees, and all that. And then the city of Eugene had to set aside another $200,000 to make this plan happen. I thank the Lord for this lady. This lady told those people the truth. And I think she had a lot to do with why Lane County decided not to join ICLEI. And that's great because Oregon is hardly a red state. Now, the Constitution is very, very clear about treaties and alliances. No state, that means city, that means county, because the cities and counties are all part of a state, shall enter into treaty, alliance, or confederation. No state shall enter into an agreement or compact with another state or with a foreign power. That's why I wanted to talk about all this stuff first. Is there any doubt in anyone's mind that ICLEI is a foreign power? It's an international organization of local governments that have banded together to accomplish sustainable goals and push those things in international forums. And they're unrepentant about it, and they're open about it up to the extent that they will let you be. They don't come into your city and tell you, well, this is what we want to do. They usually don't do that. But what they will do is they try to get the people to say, let's support these things. So we want to talk about, there's some more foreign policy goals. This is from their webpage on their post-2012 agreement. Local government stated, well, that's another way of saying ICLEI stated, that negotiations must be, and that the scientific recommendations by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We know what all happened with that. You mean ICLEI's a fifth column? Yes, it is. Colonel Mora, who was a nationalist commander during the Spanish Civil War, said he had 4 columns outside Madrid and a 5th column within it to undermine it. ICLEI is acting within the United States to promote globalist goals. They want to mobilize local governments to help their countries implement multilateral environmental agreements. ICLEI working to make local voices heard. ICLEI, in concert with the United Cities and local governments, has worked diligently to make sure that the local voice was heard and that the local role is recognized. Local governments cannot have a foreign policy. The Supreme Court decided in 1968. The setup of this is Zwerding versus Miller is a Supreme Court case. Oregon had an otherwise admirable law that said if a person died without a will in Oregon, and if the next of kin that would take under the will was a subject of one of the communist countries behind the Iron Curtain, that person couldn't take under the will because they were East German citizens or Bulgarians or Romanians or Czechoslovakians or something like that. So Zwerding was the people that would have taken the East German citizens, and Miller was a public official of some sort, the Secretary of State or the probate judge or somebody. The Supreme Court held that, and these types of cases generally don't go to the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court only concerns itself with federal questions or questions involving federal law. But in this case, the Supreme Court said, even though this law was a neutral law, it applied to everybody that lived in one of those countries. The states were not allowed to take sides and say, we don't like communism, and therefore we can ban those people from taking under the intestacy laws of Oregon. So they said. And of course, thank God that East Germany and all that no longer exists, that they have more freedom in Eastern Europe. But the Oregon law does indeed illustrate the dangers which are involved in each state speaking through its probate courts is permitted to establish its own foreign policy. If a probate court can't establish foreign policy, I guarantee you cities and towns can. Now we turn to the latest case. This is in 2000. This is a state of Massachusetts instructed all of its governmental entities not to trade with Burma or Myanmar because of human rights violations. Now, there was a number of reasons why the Supreme Court struck that down. One is that it interfered with what the federal government was doing. And two, it put the state act at odds with the president's intended authority to speak for the United States among the world's nations. We can only have one voice. As bad as the voice is right now, we only can have one voice. The President of the United States is the arbiter of our foreign policy. And we cannot have somebody, I agree with you, but we might have a conservative president in one day, and Ron Paul might get elected, and he's going to go, maybe with the help of a former blogger from Virginia, right, and go to one of these foreign conferences and then discover that ICLEI is going to be opposed to him. And who is ICLEI going to be representing? 400 cities and towns in the United States. We're not speaking as one in this situation. Of course, my advice to President Paul as Assistant White House Counsel would be, you better sue to get people out of ICLEI right away. I don't know if he'd take me up on that or not. These Virginia communities are members of ICLEI. As you can see, most of them are either in Northern Virginia, or they're college towns, or they're larger cities. Richmond, Roanoke, we have Alexandria, Arlington, which are Northern Virginia. Dumfries, I don't know what Dumfries is doing on this list, but it's there. Falls Church is in Northern Virginia. Charlottesville's a college town. Blacksburg, college town. Albemarle County is next to Charlottesville. I don't know what Abington's doing on that list. The Lynchburg, Norfolk, not sure what Lynchburg's doing on there either. But these are the cities and towns where the Tea Parties need to be active to get these communities to get out. And I'll talk a little bit about what a community should do, what you should do. What can we do? Well, if ICLEI's in your community, it's not in Hanover, it's not in the town of Ashland, but if ICLEI's in your community, you can petition the local governing board to get out. Now, they're doing that. They're trying to do that in Aldermale. They got one person to stand up and say, no, I don't think we should be a member. That person's been basically made fun of practically by the alternative press in Charlottesville and all that, but at least they got somebody willing to stand up and say, you can go to the meetings and speak out. You can have a handout. And if you're going to the meetings to speak out on something like this and you don't think that they're going to necessarily know a whole lot about it, have a handout. A handout for the Board of Supervisors, a handout for the county attorney, a handout, as many people as want the handout. Because and you want to save one handout in case Mechanicsville Local or somebody comes up to you and says, what are you talking about? You hand them the handout and you talk to them a little bit. But they take the handout home. They're not going to remember all the things that you said in citizens' time, but they can hardly ignore the handout. How do you do it? Well, some local officials are retired military, and you may be able to persuade them with a carefully worded argument that ICLEI is doing foreign policy stuff, they're violating the Constitution. Some military people are liberal, and some are not. But even if they're liberal, they may recognize the oath of office, and they may recognize that this is getting into something that's far afield from what they need to be doing. Other people are looking to cut government waste. And if you get a hold of government waste, you can tell them that Carroll County saved $100,000 a year because they got rid of the sustainability coordinator, who I understand is now writing a blog against the Carroll County people. And in fact, was one of the, I don't know if it was the one that attacked me when I talked about the Prague Spring in Carroll County. It might have been the other guy, but I think it was the other guy, but it was pretty funny because I got the left wing stirred up in Carroll County for sure. And by the way, one last thing that you can do is run for office. You always want to be respectful of the authority of local officials. I'm a great believer that God put those people there. They might have been elected, but God put them there. God gave them authority. I think we can respect that. We want to try to avoid overstating the case. We want to be very careful because we know that there's an ideology that drives things. But we also know that we have to pick our fights carefully. And you absolutely have to avoid personalities. even if they become disagreeable, and I guarantee you they're liable to do so. And you want to bring in some allies. Your Tea Party groups, your Republican committee sometimes, your good government, sometimes there's good government groups that are independent of the Tea Party. And they might even want to have you come in and speak. You might even want to get a chance opportunity to talk at like the Rotary or something, because sometimes some of those organizations are really interested in knowing more about the community. ICLEI's thank the Lord not in my town yet. What do I do? Well, first, you want to go and thank the local officials. Now, I have something worked up where I want to go down to the Hanover County Board of Supervisors, and I want to make a little presentation. It won't be elaborate like this, but they only give you 3 minutes. But I want to go down and I want to thank the Board of Supervisors for not joining ICLEI. I don't think Hanover is going to be a member of UGLI and not be a member of ICLEI, although that's possible. But I don't think that's going to happen. Hardly anybody goes down there to thank the local officials. They usually go down there to tell them off. So the mere fact that you're doing that's going to stir up, those 7 supervisors are going to ask the question, what's he here for? You can write a letter to the editor, you can have a handout, and be vigilant about those who are seeking to bring it in, because there's going to be staff that are going to say, oh boy, and they want to work behind the scenes. They want to work behind the scenes to bring it in. Let's go back to, I think that might be the last slide, but we'll find out in a minute.
Would you redefine sustainability, please?
Would I do what? I'm sorry?
Redefine sustainability.
Sustainability is the idea that we must act to protect the earth from, sort of. That it is that we must preserve the earth for future generations. That growth patterns that cannot be continued, that's going to involve things like population, it's going to involve things like the use of resources, it's going to involve how people have businesses and make money and that type of thing. And that's it. Well, I want to open the floor for questions, but I want to stop by saying for 1 minute that ICLEI, UGLI are trying to bring in a globalist agenda. Doesn't mean that everybody involved with them is bad or evil. You can always have useful idiots. You can always have people who are duped into thinking it's something good. There are also people that sincerely don't know. There are public officials that don't know. But I'm going to tell you something right now, that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, except for, I had a little prop that I was going to say there's 2 supreme laws of the land, the Bible and the Constitution. And we don't follow the Bible. Not everybody believes the Bible is the supreme law of the land, but the Constitution in human terms is the supreme law of the land. And we have to follow it. And ICLEI, towns and cities being members of these organizations is pursuing foreign policy goals is not following the Constitution. I have sent an email to a member of the House of Delegates, and I asked him to ask Cuccinelli to look into this. I haven't heard anything back yet. And I'm not going to blow the cover of that member of the House because they were bold in even thinking. But I want to suggest something. Any elected official, any member of the Board of Supervisors, any town councilman, any member of the House of Delegates, any senator can ask the Attorney General for a legal opinion that says, is this an organization that a county or city in Virginia can be a member of? I'm convinced they cannot. Consistent with the Constitution of the United States. Can't have a foreign policy. There's no statute in the United States Code that authorizes this type of confederation. So my thought would be the Constitution must govern. So I'm going to keep trying. I've got some other ideas about how to bring it to the Attorney General's attention, but if any of you know the Attorney General better than I do, I've never met him. I voted for him. I've supported him. I blogged for him, but my blogs were supportive. Some might say critical in his election, because I was one of the first bloggers to say the special session about the Supreme Court's decision about the lab analysts, and I said they need to change the law. And before I knew it, Cuccinelli was calling for a special session. You right, Tom?
Sandy is the one that started that. It got the General Assembly, the entire General Assembly, back into session in the middle of the
A lot of other people had more to do with that than I.
Steve Shannon walked away with egg on his face. It was the turning point for Cuccinelli winning, and by the margin he did. So
we want to get out there and support him because he's brave. He doesn't have any heartburn about taking on an unpopular cause if he thinks it's right. And I would like to hope to persuade him to think it's right. Now, I just want to leave with a few points, and that is I want to first thank you for the fact that you let me speak tonight. It's a great honor to speak to Mechanicsville Tea Party. I'm glad to see that there's still a lot of people. I've been trying to encourage through my blog to get more folks into these Tea Party meetings, and especially young folks, because we're fighting for the young folks of America, because we're handing over the junk to them, and I'm trying to be nice. I go to church, so I try to keep my words right, but we're handing over the junk to the young people, and we got to do something about what we're doing: the spending, the cuts, the taxes, the unsustainable social programs, and we're giving them the junk, the debt. But we've also got to remember that there's some other issues we got to fight for. We got to fight for the Constitution. We got to fight for sovereignty. The Constitution is what Thurgood Marshall invoked when he said segregation was wrong. He didn't say segregation was wrong because it violated a UN treaty. And he didn't say segregation was wrong because it violated some human rights accord. He said segregation was wrong because the Constitution said it was wrong. And thank God he was right. But if we take away the Constitution as the supreme law of the land, our rights are in danger. And I am convinced that that's what globalists want to do. They want to get rid of all the national borders, and they want to get rid of all the sovereignty.